Hi, and welcome to Sleepy History. If you're listening to this at night, I hope it helps you unwind. Please like and subscribe, it means so much to me. Where in the world are you watching from and what time is it? It's so nice to think that wherever we are, we're sharing this moment together. The mist clung softly to the hills of northern England, where fields stretched quiet and undisturbed, brushed by the early light of dawn. Hidden in the valley, between the folds of rising land and slow, meandering streams, stood a modest stone monastery. Its walls, weathered by centuries of wind and rain, were thick and cool to the touch. Birds rustled gently in the ivy, their wings whispering as they flitted between the wooden beams of the cloister. The monastery's gate, made of seasoned oak and iron nails, creaked open just after Lauds, the first prayer of the day. Within the high walls, everything moved in a rhythm of calm. The air smelled faintly of damp stone, baked bread and beeswax. Time seemed to slow in this place, as if it had forgotten to hurry. Brother Aldwin, a thin, soft-footed man in his 6th decade, lit the last of the chapel's candles before sunrise. His fingers moved without thought, guided by long years of practice. The flames glowed gently, their light dancing along the carved stone altar. It was silent here, except for the subtle hiss of the candle and the gentle shuffle of robes on the floor. The other brothers were beginning to stir. In the dormitory, narrow wooden beds lined the walls, each with a folded woolen blanket and a rough linen sheet. The monks rose in silence, not from haste, but from habit. Their lives were lived with intention, measured not by hours, but by the tolling of bells. Down in the cloister walk, dew glistened on the stone as Brother Cuthbert swept with a bundle of reeds tied with twine. He moved slowly, with a quiet focus, pausing now and then to watch the light spill through the arches. Beyond them, the garden waited, full of herbs and green shoots softened by the morning mist. The monastery wasn't grand, nor was it rich. Its roofs were patched, its floors uneven in places, but it breathed with the rhythm of quiet prayer and simple labour. It was a place of peace, built for a different kind of life. The bell rang again, soft and low. It was time for breakfast, a meal of bread, warm broth, and a small bowl of peas. The monks gathered in the refectory, taking their places along the long wooden table. No one spoke. Only the soft clatter of spoons, the gentle swish of robes, and the occasional creak of the old timber ceiling filled the room. Outside, the clouds were beginning to part. Sunlight spilled across the grass, catching in the rain-beaded cobblestones. Life in the monastery moved forward, not quickly, not slowly, but with a steady, quiet grace. The scriptorium stood along the southern edge of the monastery, where the morning sun could warm its wide, arched windows. Inside, the air smelled of ink, old parchment, and lavender that had been scattered to keep moths at bay. Dust floated gently in the light, turning the room into a golden haze of stillness and purpose. Brother Theobald, whose sight had begun to blur in recent years, sat with his back straight and his quill poised. His fingers were ink-stained, his sleeves worn smooth where they brushed against the desk each day. He copied slowly, faithfully, each letter a prayer, each curve a rhythm. The vellum rustled softly beneath his touch, and the sound was comforting. All along the room, other brothers worked in silence. Some trimmed parchment with small knives, careful not to fray the edges. Others ground pigments from minerals and herbs, stirring tiny pots of red ochre, blue lapis, and green malachite. Their brushes were made from squirrel hair, soft and precise, perfect for the delicate curves of illuminated letters. Candles burned even in the daylight, their soft light steadier than the changing sun. Shelves held neat stacks of completed texts, bound in leather and stitched with care. Each book was a treasure, not just for its knowledge, but for the patient labour behind it. There were psalters, gospel books, and treatises on the natural world, filled with careful illustrations of birds, flowers, and the stars. No one hurried here. The silence was part of the work, a blanket wrapped around the brothers' thoughts. Time passed in its own quiet way, measured by the slow progress of each page. Brother Theobald dipped his quill again, pausing to let the ink settle. His eyes strayed to the window, where a tree swayed gently in the breeze. A bird landed on the sill for just a moment, then was gone. The scriptorium was a world of its own, both sacred and ordinary. It smelled of dust and beeswax and old wood. Its walls were thick, its windows high, and the scratching of quills was like a lullaby, always the same, always soothing. Outside, a bell tolled softly. It was the signal for terce, the mid-morning prayer. One by one, the brothers rose from their desks. They folded their hands, bowed their heads, and left in silence, their footsteps echoing lightly in the hall. The scriptorium would rest for a time, holding the stillness like a breath. The sunlight shifted just a little, falling across the scattered papers, the half-finished lines, and the quiet tools of devotion. The monastery continued its quiet day, wrapped in the slow unfolding of hours. The monastery garden was a sanctuary within a sanctuary, bordered on all sides by the covered walkways of the cloister. It was not grand, but it was tended with love and patience. Narrow paths of crushed stone wove between raised beds where herbs, vegetables, and healing plants grew in neat rows. Soft moss gathered in the corners, and bees floated lazily among the blossoms of sage and lavender. Brother Eamon knelt in the soil, his robe tied up at the waist with a worn cord. His hands, weathered and dirt-caked, moved gently as he pinched away spent leaves and checked the roots of the carrots for signs of rot. Around him, the garden murmured with quiet life, the flutter of wings, the buzz of insects, and the distant cooing of doves roosting near the bell tower. He hummed softly, a tune no one taught him, only remembered. It blended with the rustle of leaves and the far-off toll of the hour bell. His basket slowly filled with fresh greens, a few leeks, and a handful of violets for the infirmary. The garden served many purposes. Some herbs, like fennel and rue, were used in cooking. Others, like horehound, chamomile, and comfrey, were steeped into teas or pounded into salves. Brother Eamon had memorized them all over the years. He knew which plants could cool a fever, which ones could soothe a cough, and which roots must be handled with care. In the centre of the garden stood a small fountain, its bowl carved from a single block of pale stone. Water flowed from the mouth of a lion, endlessly and quietly. The sound of it was a comfort, always present but never loud. Birds came to drink here, their feathers glinting as they dipped and fluttered in the shallows. After harvesting, Brother Eamon returned to the herbarium, a low building just beyond the cloister wall. Inside, the air was dry and sharp with the scent of drying plants. Bundles of herbs hung from the beams, tied with string and labelled in careful script. On the shelves, clay pots and jars held powders and oils, each one sealed with wax. He laid the fresh cuttings on a wooden tray, spreading them gently with his fingers. Then he sat for a while, looking out the open window where the garden shimmered in the mid-morning light. Bees moved from bloom to bloom, tireless and content. Time slowed, softened, and passed. The monastery lived by such rhythms: prayer, work, rest, and prayer again. It was not a place of noise or haste, but of stillness and care. The garden was its heart, always blooming, always offering something quietly beautiful to those who took the time to look. The bell tower rose modestly above the monastery's roofs, square and simple, built of thick grey stone softened by lichen and time. Its windows, narrow and arched, looked out over the fields and forest, where mist still clung to the low places, and the trees whispered softly in the breeze. The tower did not dominate the landscape, but rather belonged to it, as if it had grown there like an ancient tree. At its top, beneath the great timber beams, hung 3 bells. They varied in size and tone. The largest bell, deep and slow, called the monks to major prayers. The middle one rang for smaller services, while the smallest chimed for daily tasks, meals, work, moments of gathering. Their tones were different but harmonious, like voices in a chant. Brother Anselm tended the bells. He was a quiet man with thick shoulders and calm eyes. He climbed the winding stair every day just before dawn, carrying a small lantern in the dim light. The stone steps were smooth with age, and the scent of candle wax lingered in the air. He reached the top, just as the sun touched the edge of the horizon. He paused there a moment, lantern in hand, watching the sky slowly brighten. Light spilled across the distant hills, painting the fields with gold. Cows moved slowly through the pasture, and a flock of crows lifted from the treetops like smoke. Then he turned to the ropes and pulled, not hurriedly, but with steady rhythm. The great bell answered, its voice rich and warm, rolling out over the land in slow waves. In the still morning, it sounded almost like a heartbeat. The sound reached every corner of the monastery. It drifted through cloisters and gardens, echoed in the dormitory, and stirred the monks gently from prayer or sleep. It even touched the nearby village, where farmers often paused in their work to listen. When the bells were silent again, Brother Anselm remained a while. He wiped the ropes with cloth, checked the beams for damp, and listened to the wind through the open arches. The tower swayed slightly, not enough to alarm, but just enough to remind him of the world's quiet movement. Sometimes he watched the clouds for a long while. Other times he read a small book he kept tucked inside the folds of his robe, a collection of psalms written in a steady hand. But mostly he sat in silence, his breath slow, his thoughts soft. The bell tower stood like a sentinel, not just over the monastery, but over its way of life. It marked the time not in hours, but in sacred moments. It rang not to alarm, but to remind. It called the brothers not with noise, but with grace. The refectory was long and narrow, with high ceilings and walls of pale stone that kept it cool in summer and quietly warm in winter. Its windows were slender and arched, filled with thick wavy glass that caught the daylight and softened it into gentle pools across the floor. The room smelled faintly of hearth smoke, baked grain, and the aged oak of the long dining tables. Meals at the monastery were taken in silence, not in cold silence, but in a hush born of reverence and rhythm. The brothers entered quietly, each man in his own thoughts, his steps slowed by the quiet echo of wooden soles on stone. They bowed before sitting, then folded their hands as they waited for the blessing to begin. Brother Matthias, the reader for the day, stood at the lectern with a small book open in front of him. His voice was low and even, reciting from the Rule or the Gospels, never hurried, always steady. His words filled the space like incense, gentle, calming, and sacred. The meal itself was simple. Earthenware bowls were filled with lentil pottage, sometimes a slice of barley bread laid beside them. On feast days, there might be cheese or a stewed apple with honey. The food was modest, but it was made with care, and the warmth of it filled the room with comfort. Spoons clinked quietly. A pitcher of well water passed from hand to hand. Occasionally there was the soft rustle of robes or the sigh of the fire beneath the cooking pot, but mostly it was peaceful, the kind of quiet that made every sound feel important, even the softest one. The walls were adorned with modest frescoes, faded from time but still gentle in colour. A painted lamb near the door, a small fish by the hearth. Scenes chosen not for grandeur but for grace. Above the central beam, a wooden crucifix hung in stillness, its carved form watching over the table with solemn kindness. After the meal, each brother carried his bowl to the wash basin, dipping it gently in water, drying it with linen, then placing it on the shelf. There was no waste, no rush. Even in this simple act, there was intention. Brother Matthias closed the book and stepped down from the lectern. The others nodded to him in quiet thanks. He smiled faintly and joined the back of the departing line. Outside the refectory, the air felt different, cooler, brighter. The rhythm of the day would carry on, now turned toward labour and prayer once more. But for a little while, the brothers had shared warmth and nourishment, not just of the body, but of the spirit too. In the monastery, even a meal was part of something deeper, something slow and quiet and whole. Tucked behind the chapel and partly sheltered by the old garden wall, the infirmary was a humble place of rest and healing. Its entrance was narrow, marked by a plain wooden door with a small carved cross at its centre. The hinges creaked softly as Brother Alric stepped inside, his arms cradling a folded cloth and a small jar of balm. The air within was cool and still. Sunlight filtered through the single south-facing window, casting a warm square of light across the stone floor. Rows of narrow beds lined the walls, each with a straw-filled mattress and a simple woolen blanket. The scent of rosemary and chamomile hung gently in the air, stirred now and then by a draught from the garden. Brother Alric moved with quiet confidence. His feet barely made a sound as he crossed the room to where an older monk, Brother Godwin, rested. Godwin's breath was soft but shallow, and a faint sheen of sweat glistened on his brow. Alric set down his bundle and gently dampened a cloth in a bowl of cool water. He dabbed Godwin's forehead, smoothing the lines of worry from his face. There was no urgency here, only care. Illness came and went, but it was met with patience. The brothers who tended the sick had no cures, only the steady grace of time, warmth and prayer. Their treatments were rooted in nature. Infusions of mint for upset stomachs, honey for sore throats, lavender to ease troubled sleep. They worked not as doctors, but as guardians of comfort. A robin perched on the windowsill, peering in before fluttering away. Outside, the herb garden shimmered softly in the afternoon light. Bees drifted between blossoms, and a gentle breeze stirred the leaves of the elder tree that leaned near the wall. Brother Alric returned to his small table at the end of the room. He ground a bit of willow bark with a pestle, then mixed it with warm water and a spoon of honey. He carried the mixture to a younger monk with a wrapped ankle, injured in the orchard. The young man nodded gratefully and sipped slowly. In the corner of the infirmary stood a simple altar, just large enough for a candle and a wooden cross. A single flame flickered there, its light steady even when the wind moved faintly through the open shutters. It was a quiet presence, a reminder that healing came not only from the hands, but from hope as well. As the sun dipped lower, the infirmary grew dimmer, cooler. Brother Alric moved from bed to bed, adjusting blankets, whispering a quiet prayer here and there. He lit another candle and placed it beside Brother Godwin's bed, watching for a moment as the warm glow touched the old monk's face. There was nothing more to do for now, only to wait, to watch, and to be present. In the monastery, healing was not measured in days or cures. It was measured in kindness, in silence, in the quiet miracle of being cared for. The chapter house was round and quiet, with a domed ceiling that softened every sound. It stood just off the eastern cloister walk, near the old fig tree that leaned gently against the stone wall. Each morning, after the first labour of the day, the monks gathered there in a circle, seated on low wooden benches carved smooth by generations of use. The floor was laid with cool flagstones, swept clean of dust and lit by narrow windows set high in the walls. Morning light spilled in faintly, painting gentle arcs across the stone. The air inside was still and clear, filled with the faint scent of old parchment and waxed wood. Brother Renaud, the prior, sat slightly elevated, a small book resting in his lap. He opened it slowly, not out of ceremony, but out of respect. The rule of St. Benedict was read here daily, a few lines at a time, so that its words might sink in like water into soil. Today's reading was about humility. His voice was quiet even, not commanding, but steady, like rain on a tiled roof. The others listened with heads bowed, hands resting in their laps or folded gently together. No one spoke. There was no need. After the reading came a long pause. The silence was not awkward nor empty. It was spacious, thoughtful, like the hush that settles over a field at dusk. Each monk let the words settle within him. Some gazed at the floor, others at the light moving along the wall. A few closed their eyes, not in sleep, but in stillness. Then, one by one, the brothers who had made errors or failed in their duties stood and confessed them. Their words were soft, offered not with shame, but with honesty. A forgotten task, a moment of distraction during prayer, a harsh word spoken too quickly. Each was met with nods, sometimes a soft word of forgiveness, always with gentleness. It was a room for truth and for the slow work of shaping a life in community. No one left the chapter house as they had entered, not because anything dramatic had happened, but because something quieter had. A renewal, a recommitment, a shared breath of grace. Brother Renaud closed the book and folded his hands. The others followed his motion, rising slowly to their feet. They bowed toward the altar at the center of the room, a plain stone slab with a single candle, and turned toward the door. As they stepped back into the sunlight, their robes brushed softly against the stone. The sounds of the cloister returned, the call of a dove, the faint drip of water in the fountain, the wind moving gently through the arches. The chapter house remained behind them, round and calm, holding the weight of centuries of quiet conversations, quiet confessions, and quiet healing. In a life shaped by prayer and simplicity, it was one of the monastery's softest, most sacred places. Behind the monastery's southern wall, where the land sloped gently toward a stream, lay the laundry yard. It was a modest space, bordered by a low stone wall and shaded by tall ash trees that rustled softly in the breeze. The yard held no grandeur, no statues or carvings, only smooth flagstones, wooden tubs, and the scent of fresh water and lye soap. Brother Luitgard was already at work as the mid-morning sun broke through the trees. His sleeves were rolled to the elbow and his hands, though reddened by water and soap, moved with quiet purpose. He hummed under his breath, a low tune that followed the rhythm of his washing. The linen habits soaked in warm water, swirled gently, then were lifted out and wrung with practiced care. Nearby, a fire crackled beneath a great copper pot. Steam rose in slow curls, carrying the faint scent of rosemary. Sprigs of the herb had been added to the rinse water, not just for its cleansing, but for the comforting freshness it brought to the cloth. Lines were strung between posts, hung with damp garments that fluttered like flags in the breeze. A bird landed on one of the posts and watched curiously, head tilted. The stream that fed the wash basin gurgled softly, winding its way through mossy stones and tall grass. 2 younger brothers arrived, carrying bundles of robes to be washed. They worked without needing to speak, moving in harmony like a slow, quiet dance. Buckets filled and emptied, cloth rubbed gently against wooden boards, then lifted to the air and sun. Brother Luitgard paused to rub his wrists. He looked out at the woods beyond the wall, where light flickered through the trees and the world felt hushed. Even the bird's song seemed softer here. He breathed deeply and returned to his task, moving with the patience born of repetition and purpose. The laundry was not just a chore, but a ritual. The act of cleaning, of care, of returning something worn to its rightful shape. It reminded the brothers that simplicity was not neglect, but attention. That even the smallest act, done with kindness, was sacred. When the washing was done, the water was carried away and the stones swept clean. Brother Luitgard poured the last of the rosemary water into the grass and watched it sink into the earth. The sun, higher now, warmed the drying cloths and sent light glancing across the pale walls of the monastery. In this quiet corner, beneath trees and sky, the rhythm of the day continued gently. There was peace in the labour, peace in the silence, and peace in knowing that even here, in the work of water and cloth, grace could be found. Just beyond the western edge of the monastery grounds, a winding path led through a small orchard. The trees there were old, their trunks gnarled and bark worn smooth by wind and touch. In spring and summer, their branches hung heavy with apples and pears, casting dappled shadows onto the earth below. Brother Elred walked the path with a wicker basket resting against his hip. The late afternoon sun filtered through the leaves, casting warm golden light across his shoulders. His sandals brushed softly through fallen petals and bits of dry grass. Each step was slow, deliberate, unhurried. He paused beneath a pear tree, the leaves whispering gently overhead. He reached up, careful not to disturb the nearby nest tucked among the higher branches. The fruit was cool and smooth in his palm, pale green with hints of yellow. He placed it in the basket and moved on, humming a slow hymn that echoed softly through the trees. The orchard was not large, but it was tended with quiet reverence. Every tree had been planted by a hand now long gone. Some had initials carved faintly into their bark, softened by time. Others leaned slightly, supported by wooden stakes and hemp rope. All were cherished. Beneath the trees, herbs grew in scattered clusters: wild thyme, sweet cicely, and tansy. Bees moved lazily among the flowers, their droning like a lullaby to the breeze. A stone bench sat near the edge of the orchard, shaded by an old walnut tree. Brother Elred often stopped there to rest, to look out at the hills that stretched beyond the monastery wall. From this spot, the world felt far away. No carts, no market calls, no clatter of cities, only the rustle of leaves, the occasional call of a distant dove, and the quiet creak of branches shifting in the breeze. The monastery's bell tower was just visible in the distance, a grey finger pointing toward the sky. Brother Elred remained there for a while, the basket beside him now half full. He closed his eyes and let the warmth of the sun settle into his skin. His breath slowed. The rhythm of the orchard seemed to match his heartbeat. When he rose, the sun had begun to dip lower, casting longer shadows across the ground. He turned back toward the path, the basket swaying gently with each step. He would bring the fruit to the kitchen to be stewed gently with honey or sliced into thin pieces for drying. The orchard remained behind him, peaceful and undisturbed. Its trees stood like quiet sentinels, holding the memory of many seasons, many harvests, and in their slow-growing branches and soft swaying leaves, the heart of the monastery's stillness could always be found. As the sky deepened to a soft indigo and the first stars shimmered into view, the monastery slowly turned toward its final prayers. The air cooled gently, carrying the scent of damp earth and the last traces of wood smoke from the evening hearth. Lamps were lit along the cloisters, their flickering flames enclosed in horn lanterns that cast a golden light on the worn stone. Inside the chapel, the brothers gathered for Compline, the final service of the day. They entered in silence, moving like shadows across the floor. The chapel was dim now, lit only by candles along the altar and a single hanging lamp that swayed slightly from the wooden beam above. Its light played across the faces of carved saints and angels in the worn stone. Brother Thomas began the chant, his voice barely above a whisper. The others joined him, their voices blending into a low, soothing current that rose and fell like the tide. Latin words filled the space, not sharp or formal, but soft and lulling, echoing gently against the walls. The psalms chosen for this hour were always ones of peace, words of protection, of rest, of the soul's safe passage through the night. The chant moved slowly, without haste, inviting every listener into stillness. Outside the chapel, the world was falling quiet. The birds had tucked themselves into branches. The breeze had softened. The only sounds were the soft rustle of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl perched in the fig tree beyond the wall. Inside, the candles burned low, their flames reflected in the polished brass of the candle holders and flickered across the wooden choir stalls. The scent of beeswax and incense lingered in the air, mingling with the cool breath of the stones beneath the brothers' feet. As the last notes of the final hymn faded, the brothers bowed in unison, then rose slowly and turned toward the dormitory. Their footsteps were soft, their movements careful, as though not to disturb the peace they had just sung into being. One by one, the candles were gently extinguished. The chapel returned to shadow, to quiet, holding the warmth of prayer, like a folded blanket left by a hearth. The night deepened. The monastery, wrapped in the hush of darkness, rested beneath the watchful sky. Somewhere beyond the hills, a river whispered. And within the walls, sleep began to settle gently, like dust upon the sill of an old, beloved window. The dormitory stretched quietly along the northern wall of the monastery, a long, narrow room with heavy beams supporting the dark wooden ceiling. Its windows were small and high, open just enough to let in the cool breath of the night. Moonlight filtered through them in quiet stripes, falling across the floor in pale silver bands. Each monk had a simple cot, carved from oak, with a thin mattress stuffed with straw and a woolen blanket folded at the foot. There were no curtains, no partitions, only the soft space of shared stillness. Between the beds stood small wooden stools, and upon each a folded robe, or a candle stub, or a small wooden cross, smooth from years of touch. Brother Everard the last to enter, moved with care as he lit a single candle and set it on the central table. Its glow reached just far enough to guide his steps. He knelt beside his cot, whispered a final prayer, then climbed beneath his blanket, pulling it gently to his chest. The mattress creaked faintly beneath his weight, then settled. The others were already at rest. Some lay flat on their backs, hands folded neatly. Others curled slightly, facing the wall or the window. Their breathing was soft, almost synchronized, rising and falling like the tide in a sheltered bay. From outside came the quiet rustle of trees, the distant creak of the weather vane, and now and then the gentle tapping of a moth against the window pane. Inside, there was only peace. Above the beds, small niches had been carved into the stone. Some held tiny wooden carvings of saints, others nothing at all, but each niche seemed to watch over its sleeper, silent and still. The candle on the table flickered gently, then began to burn lower, its pool of wax thickening. The flame dimmed, casting long shadows that moved slowly across the beams above. No one stirred. There was no bell for this hour, no chant, only the quiet blessing of darkness, of soft straw beds, and of breath moving gently through the silence. In this room, dreams came slowly. They unfolded, not in rushes or jolts, but like petals opening at dawn. Memories of orchard walks, the sound of the bell, the warm taste of lentil broth, the feel of wool, the scent of lavender, the soft press of sunlight on stone. And far above the sleeping monastery, stars turned silently in the night. Before the sky began to lighten, before even the first bell stirred the quiet halls, the kitchen hearth was already awake. A soft orange glow pulsed gently behind its arched opening, casting a warm circle on the flagstone floor. The air inside was heavy with the earthy scent of embers, flour, and the faint sweetness of dried fruit. Brother Hamo, the cook, moved softly in the half-light. His feet shuffled in thick wool socks, and his breath clouded briefly in the cool morning air. He knelt to stir the coals, feeding them with a few dry branches and blowing gently until the flames caught with a whisper. The kindling crackled, low and steady. The kitchen was long and narrow, its stone walls lined with shelves and hooks. Earthen jars held salt and dried herbs. Baskets overflowed with onions, carrots and beans, while bundles of garlic hung from the beams. Copper pots hung above the hearth, their surfaces dulled by years of steam and touch. On the heavy wooden table in the centre of the room, Brother Hamo had already set the day's preparations. A bowl of barley, a jug of milk, 2 loaves of yesterday's bread, wrapped in linen to keep them soft. From a small cupboard, he fetched a handful of dried apples and placed them in a clay pot with water to stew over the fire. The silence was complete. Only the quiet bubbling of the pot and the occasional soft scrape of knife on board could be heard. A mouse scurried in the corner, pausing to sniff the air before vanishing behind a stack of baskets. A kettle was set near the fire, its spout pointed toward the flame. Soon it would whistle softly, announcing the readiness of warm water for tea. A small pouch of dried mint leaves waited beside it, tied with a string of twine. The kitchen had no windows, but a small opening near the roof allowed in a sliver of pre-dawn light. It stretched across the stone wall, barely bright enough to see by. Brother Hamo needed no more. His hands moved by memory and rhythm, shaped by years of quiet mornings like this one. By the time the first bell rang in the distance, the scent of warm barley and apples had begun to drift through the halls. The bowls were laid out on the table near the serving hatch, each with a wooden spoon placed neatly inside. Outside, the sky began to brighten just a little. The crows in the trees began to stir, and within the stone heart of the monastery, the first humble meal of the day waited, made with care, ready to nourish another day of quiet work and prayer. Just beyond the orchard, where the land dipped gently and the trees gave way to open meadow, a narrow stream wound its way past the edge of the monastery's fields. Along its bank stood a modest mill, its wheel turning slowly in the water's quiet push. The structure was simple: stone walls, a low shingled roof, and a wooden door bleached pale by sun and time. Brother Ked tended the mill. He rose before sunrise, wrapped in a thick cloak, and walked the path through the dew-damp grass, his breath visible in the cool air. The stream murmured softly, its song woven with the chirping of early birds and the soft buzz of insects just waking to the day. Inside the mill, the air was filled with the earthy scent of grain and the faint sweetness of wood dust. Shafts of light slipped in through small, high windows, catching motes that hung gently in the still air. The sound of the turning wheel outside created a quiet rhythm, a heartbeat that steadied the space. The grindstone, large and grey, turned steadily as Brother Said poured grain into the hopper. Wheat from the monastery fields, dried and sifted, now ready to become flour for the bread that fed every brother, every day. The stone hissed softly as it worked, turning seed into powder, the old into the new. He moved carefully, not rushed, his hands steady on the levers and baskets. Flour sifted out in soft white streams, collecting in the wooden trays he had shaped years before. He wiped his hands on a cloth, leaving pale smudges on the worn fabric of his robe. Outside the open door, the stream glittered in the growing light. A heron stood motionless at its edge, watching. The grasses waved slowly in the breeze, their blades shining with dew. Brother Said paused to drink from a small jug of well water, cool and clean. He sat on the worn stool near the door, listening to the creak of the wheel and the whisper of the stream. He had worked here for decades, and still, each morning brought a quiet kind of joy. The turning wheel, the fresh scent of flour, the peace of a place that asked nothing but presence. The morning passed like a breath. When the sacks were full, he tied them shut with twine and carried them, one by one, to the edge of the field, where a cart would take them to the kitchen. Then he swept the floor clean, checked the gears, and closed the mill door behind him. The stream continued on, winding away through trees and meadow, its song unchanged, and the mill stood quietly by its side, a part of the monastery's rhythm, faithful and unhurried, turning grain into the daily bread of a life lived in peace. As evening deepened and the light took on a gentle golden hue, the cloister walk filled again with the soft movement of sandals brushing over stone. The covered walkway circled the monastery's inner garden, its arches framing peaceful views of herbs, flowers, and the old stone fountain that sang in a constant, soothing trickle. Brother Julian often walked here at this hour, his hands tucked inside his sleeves, his pace slow and thoughtful. The day's work was done, the tools cleaned and stored, the prayers spoken, the meals shared. Now came the quietest part of all, the stillness between sunset and sleep. The cloister's arches were old, worn smooth by generations of hands and time. Ivy climbed between the stones in places, its leaves catching the soft light that filtered through. The columns cast long shadows on the walkway, and the scent of the garden herbs drifted gently with each passing breeze. In the garden, bees returned slowly to their hives. A cat stretched lazily in the last warmth of the sun before slinking into the shadows near the refectory wall. The rhythm of life here was so subtle, so slow, that even the smallest sound, a leaf falling, a sparrow's wings, felt meaningful. Brother Julian paused near the fountain, watching the water catch the light as it fell. He reached out and touched the cool stone edge, letting his fingers rest there a moment. The world was hushed. Even the birds seemed to hold their breath. He continued walking, turning the cloister again, not out of need, but out of habit. His thoughts wandered gently, not to worry or haste, but to small things, the shape of a cloud seen earlier in the day, the taste of mint in the soup, the kindness in Brother Alric's smile. Candles had been lit inside the chapel, their light flickering softly through the windows. The bell would soon call for final prayers. But for now, the cloister was his place of peace, a path walked not with urgency, but with presence. Each step a kind of prayer, each breath a quiet act of gratitude. As he completed one last turn, the air grew cooler. The sky above the garden faded into deeper blue, with the first stars beginning to appear. He looked up, watching them blink into being, one after another, like soft lanterns hung across the heavens. Then, slowly, Brother Julian turned toward the chapel door, where warm light spilled onto the stone. He stepped through, leaving the cloister behind for the night, and the peace it held remained, like the scent of herbs carried gently in his robes. The monastery had stood for centuries. Through countless days and nights, through harvest and frost, it remained, nestled among hills that turned green with spring and gold with autumn. Time passed gently here, not in the clamour of change, but in the soft rhythm of seasons and the steady habits of prayer, work, and rest. As summer began to fade, the air took on a faint crispness. The orchard leaves turned amber at the edges. Shadows lengthened across the cloister walk. The birds flew in quieter patterns, and the gardens filled with the scent of ripening fruit and drying herbs. The brothers moved through these changes not with haste, but with grace. Cloaks were taken down from hooks, windows shuttered earlier in the evening, and extra straw was laid beneath the infirmary beds. Even the meals grew warmer, thicker with grains and root vegetables pulled from the soil by quiet hands. Brother Oswin, who tended the grounds, noticed the moss creeping further along the walls and the way the sun struck the bell tower differently now. He paused one morning to watch a swirl of leaves dancing across the cloister, their colours deep and warm, their movements light. In the scriptorium, the candles were lit earlier each day. The brothers worked more slowly, savouring the silence, the texture of vellum beneath their fingers, the gentle rasp of the quill's tip. The ink smelled stronger in the cold, its scent mingling with the cedar shavings kept nearby to ward off damp. The mill by the stream still turned, but the wheel groaned just slightly more in the chill air. Brother Ced adjusted the gate, letting the water flow more freely. His breath rose in pale clouds as he worked, and the sack of flour at his side gave off a faint warmth of its own, having been milled only minutes before. Evenings stretched longer now. The light from the chapel spilled further into the darkness, a warm glow in the deepening night. The brothers gathered close, their chants lower, slower, as if the earth itself was settling into rest. One night, as frost traced the windows and the stars shone clear above the chapel roof, Brother Julian stood alone in the garden. The fountain was quiet, its surface still. He looked out over the silent grounds, over the walls and the hills beyond, and he felt the hush of winter drawing near, not as an end, but as a pause, a breath held between seasons. The monastery would sleep soon, as it always did. It would wait beneath snow and silence, holding its warmth in candlelight and memory. And when spring came, slowly, gently, it would awaken again. Thanks for watching this far. I truly appreciate you more than you know. If you like this story, please like and subscribe.